We're going to use Power Automate Desktop to connect to an API, retrieve and process JSON, and then create and post JSON back to the API. I'm Matthew Moran. I'm a software engineer and automation consultant. My company is Achieve Data Solutions. For this example, we're going to use ORDERSPACE's B2B e-commerce API. And the reason I'm using this as an example is it's based on a solution we built for a client. So the process in summary is this. We'll post credentials to ORDERSPACE's identity server and retrieve an access token. That access token will be used for the remainder of our post and get request to the API. We're going to retrieve a list of orders, and then we'll process all of those orders and each line item of those orders. And as we process those, we'll be creating a dispatch JSON object. A dispatch for ORDERSPACE is how you fulfill an order and remove items from inventory. So let's jump into it and take a look at the example. So for this demo, you'll need an ORDERSPACE account. You can set up a trial. You'll want to create some products and ultimately create a customer and create some orders. So you can see here in the admin that I have a few orders that are listed as new. Those are the ones that we'll be processing. And each of those orders has a variable amount of line items. So we can take a look at those. And we'll see that this one has 3 line items. This other one has 5 line items with different quantities. And this last one has 2 line items. Now, you're also going to have to take a look at the ORDERSPACE API, and we'll go through that in just a minute. And we're also going to be looking at Postman. If you're unfamiliar with Postman, that's how you can test API requests. And we'll be looking at the kinds of things that we should get back from the API and how we process those. And then we'll look at Power Automate. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go down to Apps, and you're going to want to create a private app. I've already created one. And in that private app, it will list your client ID and your client secret. You're going to need those to receive your access token. So let's take a quick look at the API and the objects that we'll be dealing with. And the first thing is authentication. So when you authenticate, it uses the OAuth2 client credentials grant flow. And they show you a curl example. This is what we'll be doing. We will be posting to this server and this URL. We'll be sending them our client ID and our client secret. And we will be retrieving JSON in response, which should include an access token. That access token will then be used for the rest of our request. We'll then go down to the orders object, and we will do a list orders request, which is a get request, and shows it here. We'll have to include a custom header. This is where we'll put the access token. I'll show you that in Power Automate Desktop. And then we will be creating a dispatch. And the dispatch will be for each order. We have to include the order that we're processing and also the line items that we're going to be clearing. Now, in our case, we're going to be clearing all of them. That's always the case with my client because they don't actually process the orders live in ORDERSPACE. They do that in their accounting package, which is Sage 50. So we actually, as part of this process, we create a order import file as we go through this, but I'm going to focus just on the API connectivity. So the first thing is let's take a look at whether our credentials are appropriately returning the data we need. So I'll go into Postman, and I have this all set up ready to go. Here's our request to the identity server, and I've already put under authorization the credentials. So when we do a send request, it comes back with our access token. So here's an access token that expires in 30 minutes, something like that. So I'll copy that because we're going to use that later just to show you retrieving an order. So we've seen that that works. Now we go down to retrieve orders, and I'm going to replace the access token in this custom header, authorization, bearer, space, and then the access token. And we're going to send that. We're sending that to the ORDERSPACE orders endpoint, with a query string or a parameter of status equals new, because we only want new orders. And here's the orders it's retrieved. So we can go right here and we can collapse this, and we can see there's one order, there's the next order, and there's the third order. And for each of those orders, we can go down and we can see that there are order lines. So if I look at this one, I can collapse the line, there's a second line, collapse the line again, there's a third line, and so on. So in our Power Automate, we're going to be processing all of those for each of the orders that we return. So we can see that it's working. Our access token, or our client ID and client secret, returned an access token. The access token allows us to retrieve the order information. If we have an incorrect access token, by the way, if I just change one character instead of that Q at the end, I put a Y, and we send the request, it returns nothing. So, so just it verifies that the information, the access token is working correctly. All right, so let's jump into Power Automate. Now I'm going to walk you through the flow, start to finish, before we run it at all. So the first thing we do is we invoke a web service. And in this web service, I'm sending this to their identity server, sending our credentials. We're doing a post method, returning the content type is going to be JSON. I don't have to do any custom headers, nothing in the request body. But under advanced, I do need to put my username, which is the client ID, and the password, which is the client secret. That's going to return a response, which I've now named. Let's go back into that. I've named my response OS token response. Okay. By default, I think it gives web service response or something, but I want to make sure I have variables that are understandable to me. I haven't changed the web service response headers or the status code. I've kept those the same, but in particular, the response here, I want to specify what that variable is going to be, and you'll see that kind of throughout. So that's the first thing, is we're going to get that response. Then I convert that response to a custom object, and that's going to be called OS token object. So we can see the OS token response is going to be converted to a custom object. From that, I'm going to then look at the access token. I can use dot notation, or I could use a bracketed parameter to return the access token to a variable called OS token. And that OS token is then going to be used when I go out to get orders, and also down here when I'm posting the dispatch, which we'll look at in a minute. So we invoke the web service again. This time we're doing orders with a parameter of status equals new. We're doing a GET request. And we can see right here I've done authorization, bearer, space, and then the OS token variable. So that's going to put our OS token there. The response is going to be called orders JSON. Then I convert that orders JSON to a custom object called orders object. And then I'm going to iterate through the orders object. I'm going to look at every order. So if we look at this loop, we're going to iterate through orders object dot orders, because based on the JSON return, that's going to be the item that we can that we'll be processing. And when we come down through that, when we're processing through that, we're going to process each line as the current order. So I create current order up here from each order, and then the current line is going to be the order lines for that object. I also set a variable here called dispatch lines. I set it to nothing, and then I'm going to use that to build the line items for my dispatch. So we'll see what that happens. And the line items for my dispatch are created right here. So I'll create a variable called dispatch line. It'll have the key SKU, and then it will have the variable current line.SKU, which returns the SKU from the line item, and then quantity and current line quantity. I then append that variable to the text dispatch lines. And what that's going to do is it's going to create we'll see right here, a comma separated list of each of the lines in a bracketed notation. So we'll take a look at that. Now that ends up creating a blank line at the start of the text. I then just do a trim to basically remove characters from the beginning or end. There's really only at the beginning I'm worried about. And I name it the same variable name. So trim text is just saying take dispatch lines, remove the white space, and produce dispatch lines. So it just cleans that up a little bit. And then right here is where I create the dispatch object. So this dispatch object mirrors the dispatch object in the API. So if we go to the dispatch object, there it is right there. So rather than just have dispatch order number, the order number is going to be a variable. This is just a comment that we can set hard-coded, or we could use variables. And then these are the items that I'm creating when I create those dispatch lines. So here's the dispatch object being created, and I just include the entire dispatch lines variable right here in the array. Now it actually creates a problem because the last item still has a comma after it and it won't submit correctly. That's okay. Here's how we solve that. We convert that JSON to a custom object and then immediately convert it back to JSON. Now I could take either one of these items in Postman and I could submit it. I could do the custom object, or I could do the JSON itself and it will work correctly. But in Power Automate Desktop, it was not working properly, and so I had to take the custom object, create a custom object, and then when I create it back to JSON, it removes that trailing comma. So it's just a quick, easy way to clean up the JSON. And then right here is where I post the dispatch back to the server. So I just dispatch order JSON, I post that back to the server. And now of note here, one of the things we had to do is turn off every item except for clear cookies. I was returning bad requests and went back and forth in the online community. Somebody gave me this suggestion and that seemed to fix it. That's not the case with every API, but in this case it was. What I do at the end is I write the dispatch order JSON to a file called dispatches.json, and I also write the object just because I want to give you an example of what it's producing. And as a matter of fact, what we're going to do is we're going to disable this action that processes the items. We'll do that before we I don't want to clear any of the orders currently. So this clears the orders. I just want to write these files, so we're going to do that first just so you see what it produces. And then I'm going to take you through line by line. So let's just run this. Save it. And run. And we see it's going through, it's creating our dispatch, it's writing it out to that file. So for every line item, it's looping through here for each of the orders. Now it's done. It's processed all three of those orders. Once again, I did not clear them. I did not submit the dispatch. I just wanted to create this file. So let's take a look at Notepad++. If you're not using Notepad++, it's a great tool. And we can see here the JSON and the corresponding object, which is also JSON. Now I could submit these via Postman, but what I've discovered in this particular process, this will submit properly in Power Automate Desktop. The custom object will not. So that's why I took the process and did what I did. But either way, we can see this for all the orders. You can see that there are 3 line items here. They're also here too. Line item, line item, line item. And here the same thing. We have 5 line items, and those are right here. We have dispatch lines, line item, line item, line item, line item, line item. Okay, so that's true for all the orders. So now let's go through the line items one at a time so we can see everything being created and we can look at our variables. So I'm going to set a breakpoint right here, and I'm also going to enable that action. And now let's run it. So it runs the web service. OS token response should be filled. We can see it's right there. I can take a look at that and view it. And there's our JSON. There's the access token. Now we're going to convert that to a custom object. I'm just going to do the next action. So now I've created OS token object right here. We can view that. Now we can see our access token. And we can see, of course, it's split out the items in that JSON, so we can take a look at them individually. I'm going to set a variable, OS token, where I grab the access token. So let's run that action. And now OS token is set to our security token. We're now going to invoke the next web service and create the order JSON. Order JSON is now filled. We see it here, orders. I could look at it, view it. So we can see everything's there. I could copy it and bring it into Notepad+, but suffice to say, it's there. And we're now going to convert that to a custom object, which we will want to take a look at. So now the orders object has been created. If I view that, here's our orders, the 3 orders. If I look at an individual order and I scroll down, there's the order lines array, which is an array of objects. Here they are. If I look at each of those, there's the ID for that line item, the SKU, the name, and all the options, quantity, things like that. So we create our blank variable dispatch lines. And now for each line in order lines for that order, we're going to run these actions. So we're going to set a variable called dispatch lines equal to this information. Now let's look at dispatch line. We now have the SKU and the quantity from that order. That is going to be added, appended to dispatch lines, which is currently blank, really has nothing in it. So we'll run the next item. Again, iterate through, grab the next dispatch line. So we've had 3 line items. Now let's take a look at dispatch lines. We can see that there's a blank line at the start, and then the items for each SKU with the quantities, and there's a comma at the end, which we're going to take care of in just a moment, but we're going to trim the text first. So remember, it had that blank line in it. Now let's look at it again, dispatch lines. We've now removed that blank line. We still have the comma at the end. However, run the next action, which sets our dispatch JSON. So it's called dispatch order. And we can see it's a little bit wonky the way it lays out, but it's all there, and dispatch lines is correctly in an array, so we could see that. Here's our line items, but we still have that trailing comma. However, if I convert it to a custom object, so now we have dispatch order object, which we can view here. Now we have the dispatch lines as individual lines. So that's ready for processing. So if I run the next action and just make JSON out of that, so now I create dispatch order JSON, and we can view that. What we'll see is that the comma at the end of our last item is now gone. So we now have a clean JSON body to submit back to the server. This is where we're going to invoke the web service, and we're going to process that dispatch order JSON and send it to the server. So I want to take a look at this again. Let's go back and look at the orders. We can see that there are 3 orders here. run the next item. And now if we go back to the same interface and we refresh it, that order's been fulfilled. We now have 2 more orders. So let's let the rest of this run and we'll see it all process. All right, the process is done. Let's go take a look at our interface, refresh it, and all the orders are now fulfilled. We can also take a look back at our JSON and it's added all those new items. And that's just something I was using. I was just using this so I could evaluate the information. They don't need to be there for the process, of course. So let me know if you found anything interesting in there, or if you have any questions or ways to improve my process, things you could do to clean it up. Would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the video or if you found it helpful, certainly consider subscribing. If you could like the video, share it, comment on it, all those things are great. We appreciate you tuning in. And once again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or follow the link to my contact form and let me know there. Thanks for tuning in.